And then, of course, and this is interesting about John Newton, because we all know about, the first thing you hear, John Newton, what's the next thing you hear? Amazing Grace. John Newton, Amazing Grace. Well, let's figure out what happened before he got Amazing Grace. He said slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls and thus are not destined for the next world. Now, what becomes important about this kind, and you'll see it both in American history as well, there is this kind of dehumanization of African people. Because you got to ask yourself this question: how do people who deem themselves superior, who see themselves as the civilizers, who recognize themselves as what we call manifest destiny, the white man's burden of civilizing all the rest of the races, how do you reconcile being the superior being and engaging in barbaric behavior? What that produces is something called cognitive dissonance. How many people are familiar with that? Cognitive dissonance is really thinking discord. It's when you begin to feel conflict between what you believe or understand or hold to be true, and you are then faced with behaviors, either in yourself or others, that conflict with your fundamental belief. It produces cognitive dissonance. Human beings don't function well with cognitive dissonance. You must remove the cognitive dissonance in order to function. So in order for people to perpetuate slavery and to perpetuate that whole system that lasts for centuries, you had to remove all dissonance associated with it. Can't be anything wrong with me. Certainly isn't us. We're the civilizers. We're the superior, so it must be them. Oh, yes. Well, you see, they don't even have souls. Now I can go to sleep because I'm not really dealing with a human being. Are you following me? Okay, let's see what else he said. He said, when the women and girls are taken on board a ship naked, trembling, terrified, they are often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey is divided upon the spot. Look at the choice of words, the prey. Resistance or refusal would be utterly in vain. And then he says, I sinned with a high hand. Yeah, and then he wrote Amazing Grace. Okay. So it's really important to understand that hand in hand with the behavior was a mindset that is so damaging. You see, I call it the secret. Not the secret that everybody's been talking about, that secret. This secret is the kind that makes you sick. How many people here are in mental health, have done direct mental health treatment with folks? If you've done you know that the secrets make us sick, yes? Isn't it the secrets that cause people the pathology? Right? How long have white people had to hold this secret? How long and how many generations had to stop and pretend Grandpa didn't do what he did? That the wealth we enjoy was not on the backs of some of these little girls. Think about how long one had to keep that secret. And the only thing you could do is either pathologize the other. It's all their fault, because it certainly wasn't great-granddad. Look how well he dresses. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when I say that this pathology goes hand in hand, I kid you not. Then you have science. And whenever we are in a process of trying to legitimize things, it's so amazing. You know, people always say this to me, even black people, when they hear about post-traumatic. Because you know it's not correct unless you can count it and measure it, right? Science is the final. It is the number one. If you can say it's scientific, then you basically trump everything else, right? Science determines reality. So if we can scientifically assert a thing to be true, then in fact it is true, because it's scientifically proven. It's a scientific fact. Matter of fact, that's what people will tell you when you try to say to them, I don't know if I agree with you. You know, it's scientific. It's a scientific fact, what I'm saying here, right? Which somehow makes it what? True. And it's also in a book. Now let's do the math. It's in a book, and it's scientifically proven. Did anybody here realize that recently we lost a planet? Anybody know what planet we lost? How you lose a planet? You know, I became fond of the little picture with we lost a planet. We didn't lose a planet. You know what it means? Science was wrong. Now, have they ever said, we were wrong about that planet thing? No. It's called a paradigm shift. So let's go to science. And I think it's important that we do. So we go to someone named Carl von Linnaeus. Now, Carl von Linnaeus becomes an important character in this whole conspiracy of silence and legitimacy and removing the dissonance. Carl von Linnaeus developed a system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. So here we have the father of anthropology. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists refer to Linnaeus's Systema Naturae of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his 4 families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus. Who might that be? That would be Native American, American Indians. Homo Americanus. And what did he say about them? He said they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by custom. Homo Europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus, that'd be Asians, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo Afer, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality traits, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it is in a book. And it's touted as science. And what's more important, my students, I teach graduate students in social work. And they'll say, but Dr. Leary, my God, we're looking at 1707 to 1778. We are, right? After all. But do you not hear these same attributions today? Those blacks, they're lazy, all of the exact same, am I telling the truth? In your newspapers, in your accounts of them, do you not hear these very same things? So does it matter that it started in 1707 and 1778 and has no scientific merit? That's multi-generational, is it not? It's being passed along. Part of the swallowing into the social gullet. Those are the beliefs, you see. So it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. And thank you, Carl von Linnaeus. Again, he's removing the cognitive what? Don't they deserve to be treated the way we treat them? Have we not just justified what we've done? After all, I just told you this is who they are. We're not wrong. We're just trying to keep the domestic tranquility. Makes sense. I'm having a clicker thing. There we go. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Just look at him. He's not right. We could tell already. But he had to contribute his part as well. He says, now this man, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he was an individual. How many of you are familiar with the term Caucasian? Oh, yes. Then you know Johann. He designated 5 races or varieties of man in the second edition of his work on the natural variety of mankind. His division into Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races, with the added Carl von Linnaeus descriptive peculiarities, became the subsequent basis of most 19th century anthropomedical studies. While Carl von Linnaeus founded his system principally upon skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying the 5 varieties of man. Central to his study was the Caucasian, a term which he originated. He took the name Caucasian, listen for the science, from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian. The Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the appropriate source for the original race of man. No science yet. Now I'm going to quote him. These are his words. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which is a mean and primeval type. The others diverge by most easy gradations on both sides, the two ultimate extremes. That is, on the one side, the Mongolian, on the other, the Ethiopian. Besides, it is white in color. Anybody here ever met a skull that wasn't? Besides, it is white in color, which we may fairly assume to have been the primitive color of mankind. Zippity-doo-dah, no science, nothing to found this whole thing. He figured white skull, humanity began white. It's scary, but it's in a book, and it's touted as science, and we swallowed it without question.
We're getting into basically how slavery was justified. That's what this whole chapter about is the lengths that Europeans went to justify chattel slavery, specifically chattel slavery, but justify the subjugating of African people. White people are superior. You have whites, you have Asians, you have all these other groups. You have Native Americans and African people on the bottom. You can enslave African people because they are not people. So this is what this chapter is getting into, and this is a very interesting chapter because she's going to get into all the different things, even expanding on Linnaeus and Blumenbach, how their theories were used as scientific fact to justify the dehumanization of African people. And it's one of the great things I like about this chapter and how she's writing this book so far is she's telling you, first of all, post-traumatic slave syndrome is her theory, and it's her theory based off her research and the information that she's come across. But one thing that she really did highlight in this book is theories have to be proven. So all theories, and she's including her theory, but she's saying theories have to be proven. So it's on, she laid out the theory. So that's how I'm looking at it. She laid out the theory. It's on us to prove it, to move it forward, to further the science. It's not just on her, it's on us to further the information. But everything that we're going to be reading about that was considered scientific, that justified the dehumanization of African people, were just theories. They were just theories. But these theories and these ideas were created for a reason. And ultimately, it was meant for the overall domination of all other people who were not white, but especially African people. So I'm going to continue my reading. I'm picking up on page 48, the second paragraph. So let's get back into it. That Black Africans sold other Black Africans into slavery is well known and is often offered as a retaliation by apologists for the institution of slavery. That's the first argument a lot of people have. Well, slavery wouldn't have happened if Africans wouldn't have sold other Africans into slavery. Yeah, like that's the exact reason why Europeans showed up in Africa, to get slaves, right? But let me continue to read. This has led to significant misunderstandings regarding the role of Africans in the slave trade. When enemy tribes in Africa made war, the conqueror took prisoners and made them what we call indentured servants, not chattel. We all understand that Prisoners of war and indentured servitudes existed before chattel slavery, and it existed throughout the African continent. We all know that, right? With the coming of the European slavers, vanquished warriors could be sold in an effort to reduce the enemy tribe's warrior forces. So Africans could not imagine the level of degradation and hardship experienced by slaves in the Americas, since they did not behave that way toward those they conquered. Consequently, when Africans sold their captives to white slave merchants, there was no way for them to know how they were to be treated upon the arrival in the Americas. There is no way to determine how Africans would have responded had they been aware of the conditions to which they were condemning those they sold. So a lot of people are saying African people sold their own people. African people sold their own people. No. African people sold their enemies. They sold the prisoners of war. They sold the ones who they captured after they went to war and they won a battle. You know, we talked about it in our breakdowns. At what point, and show me the information, at what point in time was there a unified Africa? I haven't come across the information. I'm not saying I've come across all the information, but help me find the information of a once unified Africa where all the people, all the cultures, all the tribes, all the kingdoms, all the empires across the entire continent looked at themselves as one. When did that happen? So they looked at other groups of people as enemies or just other groups of people, and they often went to war. And when you went to war, you had prisoners of war, just like in any other place in the world. The stark difference is because, remember, they've always sold prisoners of war to other people. They've always sold them. The stark difference is they didn't know that they were selling people into chattel slavery. And chattel slavery was vastly different from indentured servitude. Chattel slavery, created by a black man, improved on by the Europeans, made somebody a slave for life. They were dehumanized. They had no status of a human. They had no rights. They had no humanity, no nothing. They were property. They were tools. They were objects. That's totally different from indentured servitude. Of greatest import, the American slavery experience was exclusively based on the notion of racial inferiority. According to Thomas D. Morris in his book, Southern Slavery and the Law, 1619 to 1860, Africans were considered to be presumed or natural slaves based on their skin color. They were also referred to as thinking property and inherently rightless persons. In few societies, if any, were so large a group of people considered to be less than human based upon physical appearance. Yet Europeans concluded that Black Africans were fitted by a natural act of God to the position of permanent bondage. It was this relegation to lesser humanity that allowed the institution of chattel slavery to be intrinsically linked with violence. And it was through violence, aggression, and dehumanization that the institution of slavery was enacted, legislated, and perpetuated by Europeans. Not only did they make the idea of Black inferiority up and white superiority, not only did they make that up, they also went further as to say, well, this is ordained by God. God made Africans dark, which was telling us that they were lesser than us. That's what they're saying. God told us by the color of their skin that they are lesser than us. So we must dominate them. Look at their skin color. They're already and we know they're lesser than us. And God said it. God said it. The good white God said it. Look, like Dr. Joy DeGruy said in the clip, remember their bones are already white. The bones are white. So you know white people are the original people. The bones are white. And